evening. Welcome tonight. I want to take just a few minutes to talk to you tonight about sticky notes. If you are anything like me, you're a note person. My grandma B used to write notes about everything. She had shopping lists, phone messages, appointments. And as she got older, I even remember her writing notes about things she wanted to ask me when I came over. And there were times when she would even forget where she put the notes. She would tell me all the time, if you want to remember something, you better write it down. This is one thing I've been thinking more about lately. You see, she began to doubt her ability to remember, and she wanted so desperately to remember as much as she could. My uncle now writes notes like she did. He has them all over his counter of things that he wants to do. My dad has notes in the pockets of his shirts of things to do, phone numbers of people he doesn't want to lose contact with. I have to admit, I love to make notes. I have notes at home, notes on my phone, notes at school. They're lists of things that I need to do, shopping lists of things to get, events that are coming up, school stuff I need to complete. It makes me feel better to have notes. Most of my notes are sticky notes, so they don't get lost in a pile of papers like loose paper would. And if I'm honest, sometimes I make lists when I'm having a really stressful day, and I put things on that I already did just so I can cross them off and feel a little bit of accomplishment. I think about what my grandma said about keeping it in your mind and not forgetting. Sticky notes not only help us to keep from forgetting things, but they help keep it in the forefront of your mind. As you see it and as you read it, you're reminded what's written on the sticky note. I think if we're honest, we all would say that we have those moments of fear, that we aren't quite what we want to be, that we have let others down, and that we've let God down too. We hear in our head that we have failed as a spouse, failed as a parent, failed as a friend, failed in our home or in our place of employment. I probably always haven't been the best mom, not the most patient teacher, and yes, Jeremy, I will admit I could have been a much better sister most of the time. We're really good about reminding others what God says, that they are loved, that they are forgiven, that they have a purpose. But we're not so good at telling ourselves those same things. It's unfortunately, I think, very natural because we have an enemy who wants to deceive us, who's always there to remind us of what we forgot or where we might not measure up. And he wants to keep us from the great commission that God put before us to show others God's love. He does that by telling us that we aren't what God says, that he couldn't possibly really think that about us. We must be the one exception to the rule of grace and forgiveness. But we don't have to stay stuck. One of the ways to combat that, to fight against that, is having those promises and those truths on the very tip of our tongue, scorched into the forefront of our minds and our hearts. A reminder that is stuck in our face. Tonight, I want to introduce you to the idea of a sticky note ministry. You see, God says that you are loved, you are forgiven, you are chosen, long before the day you are born. When the lies come loud in your ear, when your thoughts are consumed with worry, remember the truths that you know. Use those sticky notes not just for the groceries that you need to remember to get, but the promises you need to remember. Write verses of truth to remind yourself what God really thinks of you. Hang them in your car, in the bathroom, by the refrigerator, wherever you'll run into them often. We can't just read it once in a while and have it constantly on the tip of our tongue, ready for battle. We have to keep it like a sword, ready to fight back when we begin to doubt. There are lots of things that you may need on your sticky notes. So tonight I'm going to give you just a few. Some people may say what other people say about us doesn't really matter, and they believe it. They may say that what we think about ourselves is what matters. If we stop and think about that, what we think about ourselves might not be so kind either. This verse shows that sometimes the thoughts in our own mind can't be trusted. Paul wrote to the Corinthians about the ideas he knew they had about him, and even what he thought about himself at times. 1 Corinthians 4:3. As for me, it matters very little how I might be evaluated by you or by any human authority. I don't even trust my own judgment on this point. My conscience is clear, but that doesn't prove that I'm right. It is the Lord Himself who will examine me and decide. If you're having trouble weeding out the voices in your mind, that verse may need some extra practice. Sometimes what we say about ourselves can't be trusted. It is only the Lord who will look at me and you and decide. This is one I have written right now on my sticky notes. Maybe the voice you hear often tries to tell you that you aren't anything special. Maybe even that God doesn't hear you. This verse tells you how valuable you are. Matthew 6:26. Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to Him than they? Read that every day for a week and see if you begin to think differently about yourself. Or this verse in Deuteronomy 7, verses 6 through 9. For you are a holy people who belong to the Lord your God. Of all the people on the earth, the Lord your God has chosen you to be His own special treasure. It comes out and says you are His special treasure. No mistake about it. Maybe you think you could never do anything worthwhile for God. You aren't smart enough, you mess up too much. 1 Peter 2 verse 9 says, but you are not like that. You are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for He called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. There's no group left out of that distinction. You can show others the goodness of God right now. Maybe you need to be reminded that you are loved. Period. End of story. Not after you do this, not after you learn this. You're just loved. 1 John 3:1. See how very much our Father loves us, for He calls us His children, and that is what we are. But the people who belong to this world don't recognize that we are God's children because they don't know Him. Maybe the voice in your head tells you that you are alone, that no one really understands. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. No matter what circumstances we may find ourselves in, whatever we are going through, He will be there. Does the fear and the worry seem to creep in and take over quickly? Deuteronomy 31:6 says, so be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not panic before them, for the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will never fail you nor abandon you. He won't fail you. He won't leave you on your own. He's right there with you through it all. Even I have to sometimes stop and remind myself that I am still a work in progress. I'm not going to get it right every time. When I knew what I was supposed to talk about tonight, I thought, oh man, this sounds really cheesy. Is that something they're going to hear and think, what is she talking about? Sticky notes? And as I was checking on some people with the recent storms that we've been having, we were looking through different people, and I saw someone talking about their sticky note ministry. A friend who I've respected for years and admired their walk posted these sticky notes that their husband hung up. You see, I wasn't sure that this was good enough for tonight, and I let the voices in my head try to talk me out of talking about it. But when I stopped and I saw that, I knew it wasn't just something silly, but it was something good for everyone, something believers on any level could do and help build their faith. So I challenge you each this week to start your own sticky note ministry, to find a verse that speaks to you and write it on a sticky note and put it somewhere you will look at several times a day. Each time you look at it, read it. In reality, it will only take a couple seconds each time. And probably by the end of the week, you will start to say it without having to read the next word. Then next week, find another one and add it to your sticky note collection. Begin to fight back about what we think about ourselves and build ourselves up with the truth that God says about us. Have a great week, and let me know some sticky notes that you're going to make.